McGovern. This is Outside Source. Russian attacks on cities are continuing despite the offer from Russia to create safe routes out. People queue for hours to escape, but the proposed humanitarian corridors will take people to Russia and its ally, Belarus.
In the last several days, more strikes have killed and wounded civilians as they try to leave the cities that are being surrounded.
Residents in the town of Irpin, just north of Kyiv, are trying to survive or flee the intense bombardment.
Well, this is a difficult journey every step of the way, especially for older people trying to pick their way out across rubble and concrete, having to balance on bits of wood.
Oil prices hit their highest in almost 14 years after the US flags a potential ban on Russian supplies with other countries. But European leaders, they're reluctant to turn off the taps. And what does this symbol mean? And why is it appearing on Russian tanks and at pro-Russian protests? We're going to find out. Russia has proposed a number of humanitarian corridors from key cities in Ukraine. 4 of the 6 suggested routes to safety go to Russia in the east or to Belarus, its key ally to the north. The other routes take those fleeing further into Ukraine. President Zelensky has condemned the proposals as completely immoral. I want to turn to the UN in New York. They're having an emergency meeting that has been taking place. Let's dip in and listen to what is being said.
UNICEF and OCHA and other humanitarian agencies staff on the ground in Ukraine and throughout the region. We've seen the images of them coordinating deliveries from bomb shelters and continuing to provide assistance to the Ukrainian people under difficult and dangerous conditions. They are a testament to the life-saving work of the UN's humanitarian agencies and your indispensable role helping vulnerable civilians suffering the consequences of war. We're outraged by increased reports of Moscow's attacks harming Ukrainian civilians in its unprovoked and unjustified war against the Ukrainian people. President Putin's war of choice has already turned 500,000 children into refugees. Already more than 1.7 million civilians have fled Ukraine into surrounding countries, and this doesn't include those who have been internally displaced. We've seen the images of elderly fleeing, a woman killed in her wheelchair, children dying in their mother's arms, and a woman being rushed bleeding to a hospital. These are the images that we're seeing daily of what is happening on the ground in Ukraine. Last week, I had the opportunity to speak to my counterparts from Romania, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Moldova, where their governments, international organizations, and NGOs have been working nonstop to welcome all those who are fleeing. What I heard was staggering. My Polish colleague, who's sitting in the room with us today, shared that 100 refugees are crossing into Poland every minute. 100 a minute. Just do the math. We talked about many of the challenges these neighboring countries are facing and how the United States can help keep their borders open to all those seeking international protection, including those who may experience communication barriers with border agents due to disabilities or other factors. We're committed to providing support, and we know that their needs will only increase if Russia does not cease its violence. We know this because of what we've seen over the last week, from the reckless attack on Europe's largest nuclear power plant, to the siege of cities across Ukraine, to the tragic images and alarming reports from those who are unable to leave Ukraine to seek safety. The world is haunted by these images of homes, hospitals, schools, orphanages being destroyed, demolished in front of our eyes. Child cancer patients unable to receive chemotherapy, babies delivered in basements instead of maternity wards, and hundreds of thousands of civilians without access to electricity, for heat, or drinking water to stay alive. Ukrainian cities are under siege, under relentless Russian shelling. Hospitals are running out of supplies, food is dwindling, and civilian casualties are mounting, while the most vulnerable group, those with disabilities, the elderly, children, continue to bear the brunt of suffering. We have seen besiegement before, from Leningrad to Aleppo. These are tragedies of immense proportions. The United States is closely coordinating with the government of Ukraine, neighboring countries, and international organizations, including those within the UN system, to monitor the situation, and we will work with them to address humanitarian needs both in Ukraine and in the region. While we are heartened by the international community's pledges of over $1.5 billion in humanitarian support so far, we know that as long as Russia pursues its relentless and brutal campaign, the need for assistance will only increase. We all need to ensure these pledged funds are flexible and mobilized as quickly as possible, given the escalating needs on the ground. But perhaps most important of all, we must heed the call we heard today from the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. That means a sustained pause in hostilities to allow the safe passage of civilians who wish to leave areas of active conflict, the safe passage of humanitarian supplies, and the free and safe movement of those delivering humanitarian assistance. We need Russia's firm, clear, public, and unequivocal commitment to allow and facilitate immediate, unhindered humanitarian access for humanitarian partners in Ukraine. Very specifically, we call for the Russian Federation to agree to and honor in good faith Ukrainian proposals for time-bound humanitarian safe passage in specific agreed-upon locations. We call for the establishment of a ground-level notification system that will facilitate the safe movement of humanitarian convoys and flights. This is imperative for ensuring humanitarian supplies and commodities can be reliably transported into Ukraine to reach those most in need. I also want to note today that the United States is increasingly concerned about the protection of civilians in this conflict, particularly women and girls who are vulnerable to gender-based violence, LGBTQI Ukrainians, as well as Ukraine's population of older adults and people with disabilities. We also call for the protection and care of all vulnerable children, including separated and unaccompanied children and those in institutional care. Children should never be involved in conflict, period. Children should never be involved in conflict. They must be protected. The humanitarian toll of President Putin's war on Ukraine is mounting. Children are dying. People are fleeing their homes. And for what? As UNICEF has reported, we know already that dozens of children have been killed in Putin's war. And as we work to confirm cases, we know the actual numbers are actually far greater. Young children have also been severely traumatized by the violence and destruction. They've witnessed so many things to the point that they've stopped speaking. The physical and psychological wounds of this war will be long-lasting. It's clear Mr. Putin has a plan to destroy and terrorize Ukraine. If the last 2 weeks have shown us anything, it's that the Ukrainian people are not going to give up. And many Russian people themselves, including many Russian soldiers, do not want this war. Unfortunately, Mr. Putin doesn't seem to be listening, and we are concerned that the world needs to be prepared for a very long and very difficult road ahead. The The Ukrainians are defending themselves bravely, and we will continue to stand with them and support them. But President Putin is clearly willing to sacrifice the lives of thousands of Russian soldiers to achieve his personal ambitions. We have been warning Moscow for weeks that in the end, Russia will be weaker and not stronger for launching this war. This is already proving true. The question is how much devastation President Putin is willing to wreak for this enormous mistake. We continue to call on Russia to change course, withdraw its forces, de-escalate through diplomacy, and we support Ukraine's call for a ceasefire. In the meantime, we applaud those doing everything in their power to alleviate the suffering Putin has unleashed on the Ukrainian people. Whatever course Russia's invasion may take, we must do everything, and I stress everything we can to help the people of Ukraine. Kyiv still stands, and we stand with Kyiv. We stand with Ukrainians. Thank you.
I thank. So that was Linda Thomas Greenfield speaking. She is the US envoy to UN. You've probably seen her speak over a number of days since the Russian invasion began. She said the Ukrainian cities are under siege, under relentless Russian shelling. She also said hospitals are running out of supplies, food is dwindling, civilian casualties are mounting. She said we need Russia's firm, clear, public and unequivocal commitment to allow and facilitate immediate, unhindered humanitarian access for humanitarian partners in Ukraine. I did see, just as I was watching the US envoy there, that the Interfax agency, which is the Russian news agency, citing the military, says that Russia plans to introduce humanitarian corridors from several Ukrainian cities from 10 a.m. on Tuesday. There will be a lot of skepticism about those promises, but I wanted to bring that to you too. Let's stay with humanitarian corridors. They are what people are talking about today. These were previously promised by Russia from various cities in Ukraine, but 4 of the 6 suggested routes to safety that would go to Russia in the east or to Belarus, its key ally in the north. The other 2 routes, they take those fleeing further into Ukraine. President Zelensky, he's condemned the proposals as completely immoral. Our correspondent Sarah Rainsford has more from Dnipro.
Kharkiv is burning again. A Russian-speaking city bombed by Russian planes, battered by Russian shells. In a war Vladimir Putin says is to protect Russian speakers. But his troops are destroying their homes and their lives. The woman who filmed this footage told us Ukraine's being punished for its free will and its democracy. Valentina sent her sister and mum to safety today. She told me she wants one thing now, for NATO to stop Russian planes flying over Ukraine. We see them, she said, and it's terrible. We found families from Kharkiv here in Dnipro today, trying to flee even further. But it feels like half this city is now leaving too, lining up for evacuation trains as soon as the curfew lifts.
Shelling, bombing, and really loud in Kharkiv. And it was a really terrible situation because when everything started, our house was like, I don't know how to tell it. It's every time.
Her mum is staying put, though it's breaking her. Ukrainians are still fiercely loyal to their cause, but realistic about the danger now.
We've spoken to people in this queue who've been standing here for 6 hours in the cold, in the snow, hoping to get a train out of here to the west and to relative safety. But it's only the women and the children who are being allowed through. The men are being pulled out of the crowd until they have to stay.
So Paulina had to hug her dad goodbye at the border. We first spoke to the little girl in Kharkiv, but she's now made it to Poland and can get the cancer medicine she needs. Today then, her mum was able to smile again. And for the first time in 2 weeks,
Paulina is playing again. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Dnipro.
Thanks very much to Sarah. Well, we were watching together the UN Security Council holding an emergency meeting on the humanitarian crisis triggered in Ukraine by the Russian invasion. Neda Tawfik is the BBC's UN correspondent and is in New York for us. Thanks for joining us on Outside Source. What was the goal, Neda, of this meeting? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, Nuala, the Security Council is having this briefing about the humanitarian situation on the ground to stay across the different obstacles that UN agencies are facing in being able to help civilians who are affected in Ukraine, and also with the ultimate goal of trying to put forward a humanitarian resolution, which will most likely be vetoed by Russia, but still France and Mexico, along with other Western nations, believe it is their duty to at least try to bring this resolution forward to act. I mean, there was a very sobering briefing there by the UN's humanitarian chief talking about just the number of civilians affected, how they are besieged in certain places like the port city of Mariupol, and just how difficult it is. And so he had three key asks for Security Council members. First, that civilian areas not be targeted in military operations, of course, that civilians are able to safely flee, and that there's safe passage for humanitarian agencies trying to deliver goods. And also, really key point is they want this kind of hotline, this crisis hotline, to be established with Russia's defense ministry. They had the first talks today in Moscow about that. The UN hopes that that could also lead to very quick and streamlined process of getting goods in to the civilians who need it.
We were also watching, Neda, some of Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the US ambassador to the UN, speak and, put forward what they expected from Russia. I'm wondering how much has the Russian invasion captured the imagination of the American people?
I mean, the images are just horrific, of course. I mean, we heard a little bit about the images from the U.S. ambassador bringing it up. I mean, children, cancer patients, not knowing whether to flee or to stay put, babies being delivered underground, kids crossing the border into neighboring countries on their own. I mean, these images have certainly shocked Americans. And if you look at obviously BBC across American networks as well, there is constant coverage of this crisis. I think what's really interesting is, the U.S. ambassador to the UN talked about how in Poland, they're seeing 100 refugees every minute crossing. And so just the level of need is quite staggering, the fastest in Europe since World War II. And so I think Americans are obviously watching this and trying to figure out how will this all play out? How will this end? And from the UN's perspective, it's the same thing. How are they able to scale up need? And also, how is this going to affect other places where conflicts are underway? They talked about the rising food prices affecting places like Yemen, the rising fuel prices affecting Lebanon, where they're on generators, where electricity is already expensive and down. So really, I think this is a crisis that is affecting everyone around the globe and capturing everybody's hearts.
Neda, thank you so much. Speaking to us from New York, which has the largest Ukrainian population in the United States. I want to turn now, however, to another aspect of this conflict. A Russian gymnast is being investigated for displaying a symbol which has come to represent support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ivan Kuliak taped a letter Z, as you can see there, to his chest on the podium at an event in Doha after winning bronze. He was standing next to the gold medal winner, who was Ukrainian, and the International Gymnastics Federation called it shocking behaviour. They've opened disciplinary proceedings against the Russian athlete. The letter Z has become something symbolic, really, of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You can see it there painted on the side of those military vehicles. They're Russian in Crimea, also used by pro-Russian protesters showing their support for the invasion. What you're looking at there is from the Serbian capital, Belgrade. Got to speak to Professor Sergei Radchenko. He's a historian and Russia specialist at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies.
Nobody knows for sure. The letter first appeared on the Russian military equipment as it was amassed for the invasion into Ukraine. Various theories have been proposed, from the purely technical explanation that Z stands for Zapad, which means West in Russian, and V, another symbol that has appeared, stands for Vostok, the East. But other explanations have also surfaced, including that it actually means Za Pobedu. The first letter of Za means for victory, Za Pobedu. Even some explanations that it could potentially mean Zelensky, as in, Zelensky being the target of this whole war. So it is very difficult to say, but what is clear is that it is something that came out, probably the idea was thought up in the presidential administration in Moscow, and it's kind of war marketing. It's a tribalist idea which calls on the people to display their loyalty to the cause.
So that's Professor Radchenko. Thanks to him. I want to turn back to New York, to the UN, because the Russian ambassador is speaking.
Views should be based on reliable, tried and tested information. We welcome the reflection in the humanitarian plan of the dangerous fact of the mass proliferation on Ukrainian territory of small arms and light weapons, many of which have fallen into the hands of radical elements, including those who have been deliberately freed from prison. The consequences of this irresponsible step by Volodymyr Zelensky, who gave the order, are already clear. The number of civilian victims among civilians from the hands of the radicals is increasing day by day, first and foremost in Kiev. We have been drawing attention to this for a long time. We call on all colleagues in the Security Council to strictly keep in today's meeting to the humanitarian context of the situation in Ukraine. We've already had the opportunity to exchange political views on what's happening, and it's clear that our views diverge from yours, and that you continue to rely on the opinion of Ukrainian politicians and also doubtful or openly mendacious material from social networks in presenting the course and aims of our special operation in Ukraine in an unfavorable light. We once again we agree with the representative of Albania that there is an information war going on, more likely a disinformation war. And we would say that in the West, in the free world, where Russian information resources are being turned off and where any information which contradicts your version of events is not allowed to be broadcast. The permanent representative of the United States today accused us of not complying with our commitments to create safe humanitarian corridors. Let's get down into this. We once again wish to emphasize that safety for civilians in Ukraine is not a problem for Russian, because we're not bombarding them, but rather Ukrainian radicals and neo-Nazis who are holding hostage whole towns and cities and are making use of citizens as a human shield, not allowing them to leave cities despite the fact that there are humanitarian corridors and that Russian units have declared a ceasefire. There are a panoply of examples of this. Thus, on the 4th of March, the Ministry of Defense of Russia and the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Irina Vereshchuk, agreed parameters for humanitarian corridors from Mariupol to Zaporozhye and from Volnovakha to Dnipropetrovsk. They were supposed to be opened at 10 in the morning on the 5th of March. At Kiev's request, the representatives of the International Red Cross were invited to the areas where these corridors were being opened. Our side was ready to provide wholehearted assistance in guaranteeing safety for the evacuation of these people. We informed the UN Secretariat of all of this in timely fashion. However, the radicals in Mariupol violated this agreement, as is clear from a radio conversation that was intercepted between two commanders of the Nationalist Battalion Azov that is in Volnovakha. The radicals there were told to shoot at the legs of those who were heading for the humanitarian corridors. Those who risked life and limb to try and leave Mariupol, when they reached the checkpoints to exit the city, were shot on sight by Ukrainian Nazis. There's a great deal of video evidence of this. In Mariupol alone, there were some 200,000 civilians who are in the crosshairs of the forces there. And those who are ready the humanitarians who are trying to offer assistance aren't able to get there and to prevent the catastrophe that is developing in the town. The critical situation for people in other regions of the country is they are also blockaded by nationalist battalions. We note that Ukrainian radicals, day by day, are showing their true face more clearly. The local inhabitants have said that they forced out the staff of a maternity clinic and then put a firing site in that clinic. They also completely destroyed one of the nursery schools in the city.
Okay, so we are listening there into the emergency session at the UN. That's Vasily Nebenza, the Russian envoy to the UN, the ambassador. Of course, everything that he has said you will have heard denied and also pushed back against by all the other states that have spoken so far. He does not accept that Russia is shelling and bombarding a bombardment of Ukraine, which of course the pictures have seen the opposite. Do stay with us on the BBC. We will continue to follow this right here.